After months of COVID-19 restrictions causing a full economic shutdown of our country and others worldwide, what will be the result? Our guest today is the Director of Econ Americas and a research associate for the Frontier Center for Public Policy. Fergus Hodgson joins us today from Houston, Texas. Welcome to the show, Fergus. Great to have you on today.
Thank you, Jeanette. It's my privilege to be with you.
Excellent. Now, Fergus, there's been some debate over the past few months on whether or not it's been a good idea to shut down the economy during this COVID pandemic. Health experts, of course, are saying it's more than necessary for the good of public health, while perhaps some business owners or even economists think that it's not such a great idea. Where do you sit on this debate?
Sure. It's a really difficult question, but the first maybe angle to address is what are we considering here? The problem is that we're dealing with health professionals and politicians who are basically looking to mitigate all risk, all casualties, right? And economists, we think in terms of trade-offs. We know that there can be some deaths caused by the virus. There can also be deaths brought about by a shutdown of the economy, because we know that a poorer economy brings suicides, it brings lower wages or salaries, and that brings shorter lifespans, broken marriages, whatever it may be. There are all these secondary factors, so we seek to bring a balance. And the truth is, it's very hard to know in such with such limited information initially how to make that trade-off. The truth is, though, now the information is in, and we know that only a small proportion of the society is vulnerable to this, and therefore the lockdown should be removed immediately, or should have been removed earlier than it has been. It's gone on far too long. I'm here in Texas, and people are basically back to regular life.
Oh, wow. Wow. In short order, too. I know things are starting to open up here as well. Now, do you think that governments worldwide overreacted to the threat of COVID-19 by shutting down their economies?
Immensely so, and it not just by shutting down the economies, but in Canada's case, the spending has been just outrageous. So there's a new report out from a sister think tank to the Frontier Center, which I work for, and they have shown that basically the spending right now from Ottawa, so just the federal level, not considering all the provincial and local governments, is 50% greater than it was during the past recession, and 47% greater than it was simply last year. So we are in uncharted territory in terms of spending. This is greater than ever recorded in Canadian history. And it is already prior to the recession, I wrote an article about why bankruptcies were spiking in Canada, because already Canadians were suffering under too heavy taxes, under debt loads they could not pay. And now we've just added a whole layer of enormous indebtedness to the Canadian public. And in terms of irresponsible spending, just 1 month ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised $850 million in aid to foreign nations at this time, as though Canada can afford this. It's outrageous. That really Canada cannot. She's in dire straits. And so we have a combination of both economic lockdown and then outrageous spending, as though that's going to fix the initial problem. The initial problem is the lockdown. We need to remove that, and we can get on with our lives.
And Fergus, here in Canada, due to responses to the recession and COVID-19, per person federal program spending will reach an estimated $13,226. So this is a national record, but not necessarily in a good way.
No, and if you think about it, let's say only half of Canadians actually are taxpayers, right? Other people are children or retired or students, whatever it may be. And so each person shouldering, let's say about $25,000 per year is a huge burden. That's why the tax day gets pushed out further and further each year. A larger proportion of the year is devoted to collecting taxes. And the truth is, when you burden the population with higher and higher taxes, it's the compliance that comes with it. Canada has a far too complicated and burdensome compliance process for taxation. And so we are basically guaranteeing an economically stalled nation for a generation to come. And I can just say this too. I'm a Canadian citizen living in Houston, Texas. What incentive does it give to people like me to make a home in Canada? It really is saying you can look forward to this. And so it's just frustrating, to be frank, because many of us have this desire. We have family there. We would like to make a home, and we feel as though petty games now or irresponsibility now is condemning the future.
What kind of, like, what do you think spending like this could do to Canada?
Well, there's a great deal of evidence to show that once indebtedness reaches 100% of GDP, it stifles economic growth. And so the prosperity that Canadians have enjoyed for a century or more will become less and less. So the advantage over the nations we're giving aid to will be less and less, such that the idea of us giving aid to them becomes an irony. And so largely, we just find Canada becoming less competitive relative to other nations such as Australia, the United States, where I'm from, New Zealand. And so you will see, which is somewhat of a strange thing, but you will see a hollowing out of the country, that more people will come south to the United States. I go to business school here in Houston, and we have many Canadian students who come down because they say, but lower taxes, much better salaries, lower cost of living. It makes sense. And I don't want that to happen I don't want this trend to get even worse, right? So right now, the disparity from only last year, which was supposed to be a record already, is enormous. So you can take your pick, whether it's sending money to fund abortions abroad or giving money to international students in Canada. This spending is totally unnecessary. It has nothing to do with fixing the coronavirus. And so we're dealing with basically a self-made crisis. The lockdown and the irresponsible spending are far worse than the actual coronavirus.
So in your opinion, is this irresponsible spending, or is it something that the country had no choice in doing?
Well, that's a tough question. I do think it is irresponsible, but you can understand the argument from those people who have been shut down to say, well, if you're going to stop us from doing any business, how can we pay our bills, right? So in some ways, they're breaking your leg and then handing you a crutch, right? So you've been hurt and then helped to get by. In terms of irresponsibility, at this point, with the evidence in, it's becoming more and more irresponsible, and it shows the priorities of those in Ottawa to expand their control, their reach, and even their surveillance apparatus. To be frank, I've written also for the Frontier Centre about how right now you see there are 5 signs that the surveillance state in Canada is at a record level, that the tracking and monitoring of us is just far beyond what has been known previously.
Wow. Well, you had mentioned earlier of foreign aid that Canada does send a lot of money overseas to different countries for foreign aid, specifically in this COVID-19 pandemic. Do you want to discuss that a little bit? I believe that you wrote an article in the Epoch Times about that.
Yeah, so the problem is that people take foreign aid at face value, that it's somehow there to help foreign nations. Yet that's simply not the case. There's strong research now that's been building up for years showing that the vast majority of that money goes to either corrupt rulers in third world nations or to cronies within our own government or contractors working with them, NGOs. And so the real motivations are basically, maybe parasitism is too strong, but big crony enjoyment, so people enjoying taxpayer funds for their own wishes, and then politicians using it as a way to buy clout. And in this case, Canada is making there's not even veiled attempt to get a UN Security Council seat, and she is buying that support from other countries. And the tragic thing about this is that you're only buying fair weather friends. Right? You're not getting ideological support. You're trying to get a seat on the UN Security Council, which I don't even know why we want. And spending taxpayer money for that. So the latest is big money going to Venezuela. I can guarantee you that money will be wasted. It's going to a socialist regime, and they are outbidding, I think it's Norway and Ireland, to try and get the Security Council seat. Let them have it. They can have that seat, and we don't need to outbid them on foreign aid spending. Wow,
so you're saying there's a vested interest there?
Yeah, it's not really hidden. I mean, basically, I can't remember when the actual vote is coming up. It's very soon, but it's well known that right now Trudeau and I guess the Liberal Party would like to have that Security Council seat as a way to say that we are world leaders or we're so influential. And the truth is that that Security Council includes many nations that are not, I mean, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, or they've got Caribbean nations, they've got small nations. I can't remember right now, but not influential nations are on the Security Council. So I don't know why we really are so concerned about that. There are also nations which really are contrary to human rights. China has a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. So it's not, in my mind, it's no marker of prestige.
Interesting. Now, in a National Post commentary by 4 infectious disease doctors, they discussed their study, which showed in Canada the individual rate of death from COVID-19 for people under 65 is 0.0006%. So this is what, the equivalent risk of dying in a vehicle accident? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we all get in cars almost every day, and we don't even think about it. So that's why when people still want to wear these masks. I can't even go back to Canada to visit my family right now, right? I've got family in Quebec, and there's a block on non-essential travel crossing the border. This is insane. We are going to such great lengths and hurting ourselves for no good reason. And it just is mass hysteria, to be frank. It's really, maybe at the outset when we had so little information we didn't know, fine, okay, people made rash decisions. But we've had 2 months of experience with this now. We know with the situation. We know it is such a low risk for people who are not immunocompromised. So yes, the risk is so low that it's very hard to justify at this point. And it just shows too, this is where I'm so glad that you let me speak, and I'm glad to work with your network, that you're letting alternative voices be heard, because so much media is fear driven. And so they want to pile up these casualty rates or death counts or whatever, and we know that data is very difficult to scrutinize, to confirm. So I'm glad that gradually alternative media, in particular, in the National Post you mentioned, have been giving another perspective here and showing that the risk is so low, it's been blown totally out of proportion.
Wow. Now, Fergus, during this time of COVID-19, there have been unprecedented stimulus packages constantly rolling out, both in the States and Canada, of course. In the States, it's costing the U.S. $2.2 trillion, surpassing the amount of $24 trillion, right, in the national debt?
Well, no. Basically, there's no hope of ever paying the national debt off in the United States. And I just heard that the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve is now $7 trillion, and I think it went up to three or 4 trillion in just the last couple of months. So the expansion is unprecedented. And the reason why this is actually going to lead to inflationary pressure is the way that not only are they printing money digitally, they have constrained the economy. At least in the US, it's less constrained now. But when you both constrain economic activity and inflate the currency, naturally you will generate inflation. And so both in Canada and the United States, the real interest rates now are below zero. So in the US, it's at zero. In Canada, I think 0.75%, the retail rate. And so you are looking, basically we're building a new bubble to create a new financial crisis in the future by all this easy credit, rather than basically tightening our belts and showing a little bit of common sense that actually when there's less economic activity, we should be spending less, not more. And we should be opening the economy as swiftly as possible to allow people to be productive. Because if we all stay at home, it's just common sense that if we all stay at home and don't go to work, who's going to produce anything? It's ridiculous. So it can be painful for me to talk about, really, because just like you, I care about Canada's future, and I just see us being our own worst enemies.
You're saying it true. Maybe explain how inflation, because you talked about inflation, explain how inflation is a hidden tax. How is the cost of inflation,
right.
How is that determined?
Well, sadly, it is a tax on some people more than on others. So the point is that people who are on fixed income, so if you've set a contract for a year and there's inflation, if prices are rising, if the currency is devaluing, you're getting paid less. But if you are an owner of assets, shares, or other, let's say utilities, your incomes can rise, right? They can be buffered by inflation. So it's basically a tax on the working class, the people who hold cash and earn set amounts. Obviously, anyone who's holding cash, you're being fleeced right now. And that's why it's such an irony that progressives will often promote modern monetary theory or greater spending through money creation, because it's really fleecing the most vulnerable among us who don't have the capacity to offset that inflation, who don't have the capacity to buy non-dollar denominated assets. So anyone who's earning in a set currency amount or holding set currency, you are being taxed through inflation, and your purchasing power is going down in an unequal manner. So it's basically a regressive tax on Canadians.
Wow, a burden. Fergus, we are out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your time with us. It's great to have you on the show.
Jeanette, I'm proud to be with you. All the best for your channel. Cheers.